For Diana. So since January, a group of us have been meeting twice a month to offer one another support while going through significant life transitions. These transitions have ranged from moving geographically to moving forward after significant loss or death. And this past Tuesday, several members spoke about the emotion of fear in their personal experience of transition. We all resonated with brave Nahshon, who smuggled water to his family, who was not afraid of the Egyptian taskmasters, who spied on Pharaoh and his courtiers, who caught frogs for his nephews, who picked locusts off of his family's vegetables, who checked on his neighbors in the dark, yet who feared the water. Brave Nahshon, who was afraid to swim. Each of us knows something about fear. It does not have to be a literal fear of swimming. There are plenty of things to be afraid of when one heads into the midst of the sea on dry ground. We all know something about losing the safety of the familiar, of losing daily interactions with cherished friends and communities. We all know something about the fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of aloneness, fear of wandering in the wilderness, fear of the void. But in our transition support group, we've discovered that real existential freedom does indeed mean believing in oneself, facing whatever fears we have, and overcoming them by doing whatever we have to do next. And because we've been meeting twice a month, we've been able to intentionally trace our way through our private sea of reeds. We've been able to remind one another of how far each of us has come in just a matter of months, and to celebrate together, even though some of us still feel we are, at best, wandering in the wilderness and have yet to enter our personal promised land. I'm grateful to Pete Talley, who as a facilitator has ended each session with a time of guided meditation. Pete observed that the best way to not get stuck in the past or get stuck in anxiety about the future is to pay attention to the present moment. So we close our group with a recorded guided meditation by Diana Winston of the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center, inviting us to pay attention to the feelings in our bodies, the sounds around us, using our breath as an anchor. This support group has been a good reminder that at its best, religion frees us from our fears. Religion frees us from our fears and offers the possibility of transformation. The purpose of our free faith, when we hear our experience echoed in ancient sacred narratives, or share the truths and experiences that sustained another during a similar life transition, or collectively pay attention to the present moment in meditation, or risk speaking our truth or trying a new thing, is to open us to new ways of being. The story of the festival of Passover in Exodus is an annual reminder that religion is meant to set us free. The Egyptians don't have a record of the Exodus story, but the historical evidence is not what is important. What is important is that the journey to freedom is a universal story common to all humanity. Moses was actually a comfortable, well-off person. He was an executive in the Egyptian administration. He wasn't out toiling under the hot sun. He could have said that the oppression of the Jewish people wasn't his problem, wasn't his responsibility. But then he encounters the burning bush in the desert, reminding him that he is standing on holy ground. And in that moment, he realizes that what is, in terms of the few wielding power as their due, rather than establishing justice, does not match what could be for his community. And he begins his transformative journey as a leader toward the physical freedom and spiritual liberation of his community. And what is the role of God in all of this? In the ancient narrative, God does not appear like a deus ex machina to free the Israelites. Think back to the Ten Commandments. Anybody seen God? Anybody play the role of God? No. There is the mysterious voice from the burning bush encouraging Moses, and in turn, Moses instructs his people to dab their doorways with sacrificial blood so that the angel of death will pass over their homes. And there are those ambiguous plagues. But what ultimately wins the Hebrew people their freedom is their willingness to stick together as a community without scrambling for individual privilege or security. Together, they go into the midst of the sea on dry ground. Together, they find manna and feed one another when they get to the other side. The Exodus narrative celebrates how it is the cooperation and work of human beings in united community, taking risks, meeting challenges, dealing with hardships, and facing the unknown that paves the way to freedom. It is not the responsibility of God, or time, or history, but of us. Now, this is a timely reminder for our community. Our stewardship committee shared this week that pledge figures are only at $220,000 compared to $287,000 at this time last year. While the stewardship committee continues to pursue contacting members who have yet to pledge, they have also asked us to consider increasing our pledges. As we face our own REDC at TUUC, I received an email this week from a modern Miriam in our midst. Miriam, as you will remember, was the sister of Moses, who led the Hebrew people singing and dancing out of the reedy sea. And our modern Miriam wrote, "We have a vibrant church with a rich religious education program, inspiring music, an engaged congregation, and an abundant outreach program that enriches our community. We also have a budget challenge." Now, our modern Miriam didn't call for us to dab our doorways with sacrificial blood or to leave before our bread rises. Instead, she went on to observe, it might be time to call in Einstein. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. She continued, there are things we can do together. She celebrated that last fall in town meetings, the congregation generated 100 ideas for how to meet any shortfall. She celebrated that the board is planning additional town hall meetings to discuss how to implement these ideas. And I could picture her shaking her tambourine as she wrote what each one of us can do. We can attend one of these meetings to help to choose and create and find our way forward. This modern Miriam concluded, I think we're lucky to have a board that cares so much about our church and a congregation that has already started putting energy into this. We are not at all unlike other united human communities who have come together, committed to cooperation and to working together to meet challenges and face the unknown on the journey toward freedom. For example, in the 17th century, the Exodus story inspired the Puritans to understand their departure from England to the shores of New England in terms of a journey of liberation, a a journey towards religious freedom. In the 18th century, the story of the Hebrew Exodus inspired Ben Franklin to suggest that the Hebrew Exodus be depicted for the reverse of the official seal of the United States. Congress adopted half of Franklin's design and, ironically, substituted a pyramid for Franklin's Sea of Reeds. Rabbi Lawrence Kushner was right. We live in paradox. In the 19th century, the story of the Hebrew Exodus inspired enslaved African Americans to sing "Go Down Moses" and "Wade in the Water" as they made their way not through the Sea of Reeds, but along the secret meeting points and safe houses of the Underground Railroad, taking them to the promised land of Canada. In the 20th century, the story of the Exodus inspired the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s rhetoric that someday, as a nation, we would be free at last. And as a result, this morning in the first service, Sue Shancroft dropped a stone to remember and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And the story of the Exodus continues to inspire Unitarian Universalists, especially those who work for social justice, who know that the journey toward freedom entails struggle and sacrifice and work. It took over 8 years and many journeys to Annapolis to get legislation passed to uphold marriage equality. It took almost as many years and outreach, education, and journeys to Annapolis to get the Fairness for All Marylanders legislation passed. It will take more journeys to Annapolis and perhaps to Washington, D.C. to undo the damage done to the environment by non-renewable sources of energy, and to our democratic process by the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United and McCutcheon. But we know that change is possible. We know that redemption is possible. Stamps for toasters, slaves for free men and free women, bigotry for love, discrimination for fairness, subsistence for a safe, decent standard of living within the community. We've lived it. We've helped to create it. So to paraphrase the Haggada's "next year in Jerusalem," meaning that another year has gone by, we have yet to complete the journey to freedom, but we're getting there. We are closer to the promised land than we were last year. Next year, Annapolis. Passover reminds us that each generation advances greater freedom for the next generation. And what sustains us along the way? Part of the Passover Haggadah is the Dayenu, the recognition of and giving blessings for life, no matter what the trials we are currently facing. The Dayenu is about spiritual hope and liberation. It is saying that no matter what is happening right now, what we have already been given is enough, is sufficient, is what we need. It is like allowing the breath to anchor us in meditation. This allows us to move to the next moment and receive the next waiting gift. The hymn of Dayenu acknowledges that it would have been enough to escape from Egypt. But then to make it to the desert and be fed with manna, well, that would have been enough. Dayenu. But then Moses brings the commandments to keep the Sabbath, a day of rest from work for former slaves. Dayenu. Dayenu is a joyful song of gratitude, teaching us not to despair when the ultimate end seems far away. So whether as individuals, a community, or a society, we all know the universal human experience of walking into the sea on dry ground. No longer green stamps, no longer slaves, not yet toasters, not yet free men and free women. In her poem Passover, the Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Unger, describes the human condition, individual life transitions, the Hebrew Exodus, redemption in the journey toward freedom in these words. The promise from those first naked days outside the garden is that there is no safety, only the terrible blessing of the journey. You were born through a doorway marked in blood. We are, all of us, passed over, brushed in the night by terrible wings. Ask that fierce presence whose imagination you hold. God did not promise that we shall live, but that we might at last glimpse the stars, brilliant in the desert sky. Together may we glimpse the stars, brilliant in the desert sky, and trust that we have sufficient material, emotional, and spiritual resources to meet our challenges in our ongoing journey to freedom. In affirmation of this, let us join in singing hymn number 220.